So Boyner's Bible here again, and we're looking at Timothy, which really 1 Timothy is instruction for the church through Timothy. Timothy had been a marvellous companion to Paul. By this time, he's been with him at least 10 to 15 years, and it's become indispensable. Actually, you get the feeling of Paul and all his friends that they were indispensable. He was a man who enjoyed the company of others. He loved friendship. In my church life, it's always been about people. It's not been about the institution of the church, no matter what kind of church it is. I think I've been in lots of... I remember being invited by Orthodox group of evangelical churches in the United States. That was a run-on from a great mission, which was Campus Crusade in the States. And these people had been working in Campus Crusade and wanted to see Christians established, young Christians established in the faith. So they decided to do their own historical research and went further back than the Catholics and came to the Orthodox, so they say. I never entered into that debate, but I loved them very much. And I went to about 5 or 6 Orthodox churches preaching. I remember I was doing Ezekiel at the time, so quite a few of them had Ezekiel in the journeys. In this country where I live, I've been in close fellowship with a range of Anglican churches and still are. Love the people. I've been in various other churches and types. Love the people. And I'm now in an FISC church and love the people. I spent so many years in my travelling round being amongst the Christian Brethren, known as Plymouth Brethren in the States. And what a blessing they have been in my life. You see, it's people. And Paul knew what it was to have friendship. And if we become people clinging to one group, we become denominational. Whereas if we say we won't allow a condemnational spirit to get in us, even if we disagree with them. And I disagreed with some of my friends. Indeed, I'm known to disagree with everybody. It's on something, but not disagreeable, and not disagreeable with the lovely people, and to have a spirit of humility, and be prepared to say, this is what I believe, but I could be wrong. That doesn't matter. If you say, I believe in Jesus Christ and I'm confident, that's wonderful. And if you've developed your faith in Jesus, that's wonderful. Timothy had developed his faith in Jesus. He had learned the scriptures from his mother and his grandmother, and he had taken into his being Jesus. He wasn't of the same character as Paul. He wasn't as direct as Paul. He maybe wasn't as gifted, and Paul seems to be multiple gifted. He may have been the person doing a lot of the mopping up at the end of the day when he was with Paul. He may have been one of those who was helping Paul in the beginning of a journey. He often was sent by Paul to help a church out here or there. We even read of him in Hebrews, of him being in prison and coming out, if it's the same person in Hebrews, that is. So we come here with Timothy, and through Timothy, instructions for the church. And that is good, that we have, near the end of the life of the Apostle Paul, instructions for the church. The instructions for the church are interesting because what they give to us is instructions that are doable. In other words, you don't need a committee to work out the instructions for the church. And through Timothy, these instructions are made available. The fact that the Timothy letters were copied out, I know in my work, sometimes somebody writes me a letter and I'm going to pass it on. I take out the bits that are not applicable and I send the letter straight on. I want them to hear what the other person has said, especially when it's to with what I call objective criticism in relationship to publishing. Well, we have this one of Timothy, the instruction that is given to Timothy. And if you look at the instruction to Timothy, to Titus, and to Timothy too, you'll find something very interesting. In the one instruction is commending hope. In the other instruction is commending love. And the other instruction is commending life. You just check them out, how you have them. In other words, when Paul is writing, he doesn't write in a kind of, I always write like this. He always gives them grace and peace. But there's a blend within the greeting that is distinctive, that Paul thinks they need at that time. And you have that as you read the introduction in the first couple of verses. Paul talking in one about hope, in another about life, in another about love. The other things you notice is that he wants him still in Timothy to be on his guard against false teachers. It does look as if that you have now hundreds, if not thousands, of house groups. And it's quite easy for the travelling man to come around, and they were mainly men. I don't read in history of travelling ladies. There may have been travelling ladies, but I don't read it. But what I've read, travelling men going round. And they were allowed, they were called charismatics, which meant preachers and teachers in those days. Not charismatics the way we talk about charismatics today. They were preachers and teachers. And they were allowed to give instruction for 2 or 3 weeks. And then they had to move on or get a job. Then they could stay and help in the work of the church, of which there were elders and deacons. And that's very clear here, to look after the church. But some of these people could be teaching error, teaching wrong. And if they could plant a seed that's negative and that's against Christ, against the Christian faith, against the kingdom of God, against the wonderful things that happen, that church could suffer for a long time. So be on your guard against error, against people with big egos that want to preach what they believe and not submit their egos to the greatness that's far greater than anything they are to the Lord Jesus Christ. So you've got to oppose the false teachers. The second great principle is to say to Timothy, fight the good fight, faith. Be strong in the Lord, in the power of his might. Maybe that was an area that there was a weakness. Matt and I was just talking about human weakness and how we have to fight the human weakness. But also we have to accept the human weakness. In other words, we fight to improve, but I'm dyslexic. And a few years ago I had a small stroke. It was over in a few days, not the effect of it, but the stroke itself. It came and went very quickly. But my dyslexia seemed to have got worse as a result. I could be fooling myself. It might just be old age. But what do I do with it? I'm a publisher. Well, with me, I have to depend on other people. And when I talk like I do here, I make mistakes. A macro principles becomes macro elephants, for instance. So I fight the good faith. I have an instruction into church life for them and the next generation, for them and the next generation, for them and the next. In other words, the house groups have to be teaching. The fact there's a dozen of you in a house group, and most of them were about a dozen, you're there to teach. But you are there to teach others to teach. So if Timothy was to be one of these churches and was there for 3 weeks, he has got to teach the teachable, to teach the next teachable. And so you have the apostolic teaching, first of all, verbally, going from church to church, from place to place. By the time we come to the New Testament being completed, and with the Old Testament, We have a complete revelation of God, and the apostolic teaching is our New Testament. The Gospels are Jesus and the 12, and the work of Jesus in the world, and the cross, and the resurrection, and the ascension. The Acts of the Apostles is the church reaching out with the good news of Jesus Christ to towns and villages and cities, and then on the road, the Roman roads, to key cities until you end up in Rome. The epistles are teaching. You cannot read Romans without realizing what a marvelous teaching program it is. You can read Peter as well. Sometimes Peter is forgotten because of the greatness of Paul, but the first Peter 1 Peter is a marvelous teaching program that a church could spend months with. We need teaching to teach. So we talk about leadership, and there are some very important things about leadership. There is the need always to remember that a leadership is not a separate body from the body of the people in the church. The leadership is an integration into the church of people. They're part of people. They come from the people and they're part of people. If you have an oversight, what names you call them, if you have a group of people who only meet up to discuss the practical matters of the church, independent of the church, you've lost the meaning of leadership. Leadership is to lead, not one man or two men or a little group of people at the top. There's to be an integration, and they're called from among you. So often we call a man to a church from miles away. It's from if we don't have teaching, I can understand that. We want to teach us for somewhere else because we haven't used the teaching potential in our church. Every leader in the church should to a degree be a teacher. And one of the great things of this teaching to teach, going on for the next generation that you find in the Timothy's and Titus, is the fact that Paul realizes now, after 3 years being absent, thinks all Asia has that there's got to be teaching for the future. We're fortunate today, we have this great apostolic teaching of our New Testament. We've got more than sufficient to teach and to teach and to teach. Would it be good sometimes that the leadership are taught what is meant to be a leader in and among God's people? You can obviously say, if you become an elder, please read Timothy's and Titus's, and these are the passages you read. But would it be good to have a one-to-one or a group session that you just go through slowly what is required? How your homes are to be used for the glory of God, to be given to hospitality. How you should have a shepherd's care for the people of God, whether you're an elder or a deacon. And so in this book, you have in the first 2 chapters, or the first 3 chapters, the direction and the charge to the church itself. When we come to the second half of the book, it's really a direction about in himself, and it deals with practical things. There's a concern for the elderly and the widows, a concern for an attitude towards slavery, you'll find. There's a concern for false teachers, and a concern for the leadership's personal life, and a concern for the rich. Yes, the rich come into this category as well. There are lessons for us all. That's what I'm saying, no matter what it is. So we oppose false teachers in 1 Timothy. We fight the good fight of faith in 1 Timothy. There are instructions for church life in 1 Timothy. There is instructions about church ministers and ministry in 1 Timothy. how to serve and how to share and how to stand are all part of 1 Timothy. This is going to lead us into 2 Timothy, which I'm going to do as a separate talk. But the gap between 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy was short. In the first book, he is still in his problems. And then in the second book, you've got him facing death itself. And therefore, there's a tone different. Talks about the crown of glory. But we'll come that in 2 Timothy. For now, Boy and his Bible, encouraging you to read it and absorb it for yourself. A marvellous book. Thank you for listening.